The Phoenix sun had baked the streets for hours, but I didn't notice it until I finally pulled into my driveway. My tie was still tight around my neck, leaving a faint red ring that reminded me of the hours I just survived at the dealership. 10 hours of negotiating, smiling, pretending everything was fine, while my mind wandered to the only thing that mattered, getting home. Finally, I stepped out of the car, the leather of my shoes sticking slightly to the asphalt, and adjusted my briefcase strap. A soft hum of the air conditioning unit somewhere near the house greeted me, but it did little to ease the Phoenix heat that seemed to cling to my skin like a shadow. I was halfway up the walkway when I heard it, a voice I knew too well, calm but with a calculated edge, speaking in hushed tones through the partially open front door. "The guide will do everything quietly," Melvin said. My stomach tightened, my heartbeat skipping a beat. A crocodile or a buffalo, it's an accident. No one will suspect anything. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The words didn't make sense at first. The rational part of me tried to dismiss it as a harmless joke. But there was something in the way he said it, slow, deliberate, practiced, that felt wrong. The same voice that had once seemed harmless now carried a hidden weight, a threat. I smiled carefully, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Okay, boy," I muttered under my breath. "Let's see which one of us has an accident first." My pulse raced, but I forced my feet to move forward, each step slow, deliberate, measured. Inside, the house felt different, alive in a way I hadn't felt for weeks. 2 weeks of icy silences, of cold shoulders and avoided conversations. 2 weeks since I had refused Melvin $35,000 for yet another one of his brilliant investment schemes, the kind that sounded perfect until the money vanished into some empty venture. I had called it wasteful, reckless. Frances had looked at me as if I'd struck her. Then they both went silent. No good mornings, no small talk, just a gaping distance between us. And now, here I was, back in my own home, and the voices, low, careful, and conniving, were carrying across the living room. I reached the doorway, hand resting lightly on the frame. They didn't notice me yet. Melvin and Frances sat side by side on the leather couch, an envelope resting between them like a delicate secret. I observed them for a long moment, studying their faces. Frances's expression was carefully neutral, like she had rehearsed the exact way to look at me so that I would hesitate. Melvin's smile was too wide, too sudden, and it didn't reach his eyes. I didn't trust it. Not for a second. "What's this?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, though my hands twitched by my side. Melvin gestured at the envelope with a careless flourish. "Ben, Frances and I have been talking about the argument, about everything. We want to make things right. Open it." I didn't move. The words sounded rehearsed, like actors reading lines. 2 weeks of cold shoulders, and now this. Charm, followed by a gift. I had seen the pattern before countless times, but then my eyes caught Frances's gaze. There was something there, a flicker of the daughter I once knew, softer than I remembered. Something I hadn't dared hope for in years. I took the envelope. Inside were boarding passes, thick cardstock with airline logos embossed in gold. Business class. My hands trembled before my brain caught up with reality. Tanzania. My chest tightened, disbelief choking me. How? Melvin, who hadn't hit a sales target in 6 months, who constantly complained about gas money, had paid for this? The cost must have been at least $12,000. Probably more. I looked up at his face, searching for the angle. There was always an angle. Always. But Melvin's voice came quickly, rehearsed yet oddly sincere. "You always talked about Africa, remember? At Frances's birthday dinner 3 years ago? We want you to finally go. You've earned it." I studied Frances's face. The warmth there, the softness, the careful tenderness. It was something I hadn't felt in years. Something that reminded me of her childhood, of the little girl who used to curl her small fingers around mine when she wanted comfort. She crossed the space between us in a blur of motion and wrapped her arms around me. "Dad," she whispered into my ear, her voice soft, hitting something deep inside me. "You work so hard. You give us so much. Let us give something back to you for once. Please, we want you to have this. Her words, the hug, the remembered pressure of her small hands on mine. It broke something open inside me. The resistance I had held for weeks, maybe years, crumbled like dry sand. I wanted to believe, I needed to believe. Maybe Melvin had grown up. Maybe Francis had chosen to fight for our family. I pulled them both into a hug, closing my eyes to the sting of old disappointments and new hope. When I opened them again, I noticed Melvin's smile for the briefest moment. Something flickering, something calculating. But Francis was warm against me, and I pushed the thought away. When do I leave? I asked, my voice trembling, both from emotion and disbelief. 3 days, Melvin replied. Gives you time to pack, get your affairs in order. 2 weeks in Tanzania, safari, lodges, the whole experience. I stared at the word Kilimanjaro printed in bold letters on the ticket. My dream. The one I had mentioned maybe twice, years ago. My pulse quickened. My mind raced with memories, doubts, fears, and hope. How did you pay for this? The words escaped before I could stop them. Come on, Melvin said, his laugh slightly awkward but genuine. Don't overthink it, just enjoy it. You deserve a break. The dealership will survive without you for 2 weeks. Francis squeezed my hand again. Promise us you'll actually relax. No checking emails, no worrying about us. Just be happy, Dad, be happy. I promised, meaning it. Finally, after so long, someone had reminded me what happiness felt like. For the next hour, we talked about the itinerary. Francis made coffee the way I liked it. Too much sugar, not enough cream. Melvin told a story about a customer at the dealership that actually made me laugh. For those 60 minutes, we were family again, just like it had been before the silence, the tension, the constant distance. After they left, I sat in my study under the lamplight. The tickets felt heavy, real, expensive, undeniable. I picked up a framed photo from my desk. Frances at 7, missing her front teeth, laughing at something I had said. Where had that little girl gone? When had she learned to look at me with calculation instead of love? Yet there it was, tangible, undeniable. The tickets, Africa, Tanzania, Kilimanjaro. The dream I had postponed for decades was suddenly within reach. I touched them again, twice more, as if to make sure they were real. They were, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the little girl Frances had once been, the daughter I remembered, was still there, waiting to come back. Tomorrow, I would start packing. Tomorrow, I would let myself feel excitement instead of suspicion. Tomorrow, I would begin to trust my daughter again. The morning sunlight cut through the blinds, sharp and white, as though Phoenix itself had decided to remind me I was still alive, still here, still tethered to reality. I woke before my alarm, which meant my body had already absorbed the electricity of excitement, fear, and disbelief I hadn't yet dared to name. The boarding passes lay on the nightstand, as real as my pulse, as tangible as the quiet tension that had haunted me for weeks. Tanzania, Kilimanjaro. 2 weeks of safari, lodges, wildlife I'd only ever dreamed of in the pages of National Geographic magazines, or in passing conversations at family gatherings when no one thought I was listening. I reached for the tickets first, instinctively, and held them like fragile glass. The embossed gold logos of the airlines glinted in the early sunlight. Business class, each card was thick, substantial, expensive. My hands shook, not with fear this time, but with the kind of disbelief that feels like it could ripple through the whole body. $12,000, at least. Melvin had somehow, impossibly, done this. I rose from the bed, bare feet hitting the cool tile floor, and made my way to the kitchen. The smell of stale coffee lingered faintly from last night, but it didn't bother me. My mind was elsewhere, cataloging every detail of that moment yesterday, replaying Frances's small, determined hug, her voice soft against my ear. She hadn't said, "I love you," directly, not in so many words, but the weight of her hands, the subtle pressure on mine, spoke more than language ever could. And yet, suspicion lingered. Melvin, that name carried decades of anxiety for me. The man who had overstayed every welcome, who had treated my home as his own, who had taken more than he had ever earned, had somehow found the means to orchestrate this gift. There had to be a catch, a debt, a condition, some hidden angle. I shook the thought away, or tried to. My mind refused to accept that generosity could exist without manipulation. I poured myself a cup of coffee. Too much sugar, not enough cream, just the way Francis used to make it, and sat at the kitchen table. The tickets rested beside my hand like a portal to another life, another world I'd been promising myself for 30 years. I thought of lions pacing across golden savannas, elephants meandering slowly through dense forests, and Kilimanjaro's snow-capped peak looming against the cerulean sky. It felt surreal. Memories began to surface, unbidden. Frances at 7, her cheeks flushed with excitement as she handed me a handmade card on my birthday. Her small hands had clutched mine as she whispered some secret only I could hear. How had that child disappeared under layers of adulthood, under Melvin's influence? How had her warmth been replaced with calculation, her love with subtle distance? And yet now, the gestures, the tickets, the look in her eyes, they whispered of the girl who had once existed, the daughter I had known. I remembered the early days when Melvin first appeared in our lives. Frances's excitement had been infectious, her eyes bright, her voice asking if he could stay temporarily, just until they got on their feet. I had agreed naturally, like any father would. Temporary had become permanent. The guest room became their bedroom. My home became their home. My generosity had been limitless, and yet the gratitude had often felt absent. I thought of the Lexus I had bought them for their anniversary, $45,000. The paychecks I had allocated for their temporary needs. The patience I had extended while Melvin missed sales targets, complained about gas money, or tried to convince me to invest in another one of his harebrained schemes. And now a gift, a $12,000 safari. No conditions mentioned, no hidden agenda apparent. My skepticism warred with a desire to believe. I traced the edge of the boarding passes with a fingertip, letting the embossed letters sink into my skin. The words Tanzania and Kilimanjaro seemed impossibly heavy with promise, yet impossibly delicate with truth. I could feel the weight of a dream I'd long buried under decades of practicality, responsibility, and quiet frustration. The thought of leaving in 3 days made my pulse quicken. 3 days, pack my bags, prepare my home, prepare my mind for an adventure I hadn't dared allow myself to. Imagine, I pictured the lodges. Wooden chalets perched above rushing rivers, decks overlooking golden plains dotted with acacia trees. I pictured mornings scented with the damp earth of dawn, evenings filled with the calls of wildlife. And above all, I pictured lions, the kings of the savannah, roaming with pride, majestic and untamed. Elephants, moving like quiet giants through forests, massive trunks sweeping the underbrush. A dream 30 years in the making, and now within reach. I paused, considering the reality of trusting them again. Trust. The word felt foreign, rusty on my tongue. Could I believe that Melvin had finally matured? Could I allow myself to see Frances, not as a woman shaped by compromise and calculation, but as my daughter again, capable of love and thoughtfulness, untainted by the schemes of her husband? The tickets were real. The gift was real. And yet, the shadows of the past clung stubbornly to my mind. I rose and walked through the living room, tracing my fingers along the spines of books on the shelves, touching frames holding photographs of family vacations, birthdays, and milestones. The room was quiet now, but it felt alive in memory. I remembered the sound of Frances's laughter, her small hands tugging at my sleeve, the pride in her eyes as she achieved small victories. That girl had not disappeared entirely. Perhaps this gift was her bridge back. Perhaps this trip, this safari, was not just a journey across continents, but a journey back to our family's heart. I opened the envelope once more, as if confirmation lay in the repeated action. The cards were real. Kilimanjaro, the Serengeti, the rivers where crocodiles waited silently for prey, the luxury lodges, the guides, the itinerary meticulously laid out by someone who had clearly spent hours ensuring every detail was perfect. Melvin's handwriting was neat, precise, A small note tucked in the corner. Dad, enjoy. No conditions. Just go. I sank into the armchair, coffee cooling beside me, and allowed myself to imagine the first day of the safari. The thrill of the airplane taking off, the hours of anticipation, the landscapes unfolding beneath us. And yet, underlying the excitement was caution, the vigilance born of years of disappointment. Could I allow myself to feel hope unguarded, unprotected? Could I trust that this time, the generosity was genuine? Hours passed. The tickets remained in my hand. I did not eat. I did not check emails. I simply stared at them, letting the world narrow to the embossed letters and the promise they carried. Africa, lions, elephants, Kilimanjaro. My dream, my long-postponed escape, had arrived. Not just as a gift, but as a test of faith, of trust, of my ability to allow myself to hope without fear. I thought of Frances again, her small hands around mine, her eyes soft with care. The girl I had known, the daughter I had loved, was perhaps buried under years of adulthood, compromise, and Melvin's influence. But she was there. And these tickets, tangible and undeniable, were her message. I remember you. I want you to feel well. I want you to trust again. I placed the tickets on the desk beside the photograph of Frances at 7, smiling, missing her front teeth, innocent and uncalculated. Perhaps this trip would allow both of us to reclaim something lost. The laughter, the warmth, the connection we had once taken for granted. Perhaps this was more than a gift. It was a bridge back to family, to trust, to hope. I poured a second cup of coffee, the liquid black and bitter but grounding, and sat back in the chair. I let myself imagine the first morning in Tanzania, the sun rising over the savannah, the scent of earth and life filling my lungs. I let myself feel excitement, pure and unguarded, for the first time in decades. I let myself believe, if only for a moment, that generosity could exist without ulterior motive, that love could shine through years of mistakes and misjudgments. And for the first time in years, I smiled without reservation. Tomorrow, I would begin preparing for the journey. Tomorrow, I would start packing khakis and lightweight shirts, selecting boots and binoculars, imagining lions and elephants in rivers teeming with life. Tomorrow, I would step toward Africa and toward hope, toward trust, toward a daughter who might still be the same little girl she once was. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel the possibility that maybe, just maybe, family could be whole again. The suitcase sat open in the middle of the bedroom, a silent challenge. Its wide maw seemed to taunt me, demanding khakis, shirts, socks, and shoes. I had bought it 8 years ago, a graduation gift for Frances, in anticipation of the European tour she had planned with her friends. She had been thrilled, bouncing on her heels as I zipped it closed for the first time, her voice bright, filled with laughter, and her excitement infectious. Now as I stared at it, the suitcase no longer symbolized adventure for my daughter. It symbolized the impossible weight of years, decisions, and consequences. Memories surfaced, jagged and relentless. Frances at 27, glowing with a new kind of love, introducing Melvin into our lives. Her eyes shining, voice earnest. Can he stay just temporarily, until we get on our feet? I had said yes, naturally. That was my role as a father. Temporary became permanent faster than I could process. The guest room transformed into their room. Our house became shared space. And Melvin became a fixture, one I tolerated more than I embraced. The early days of Melvin's integration had been almost charming. He had spoken confidently, even if experience lacked, and I, too trusting or too blind, had created a position for him at the dealership. $65,000 a year, despite zero sales experience. I had watched as other salespeople struggled, while Melvin missed target after target, every excuse plausible, every failure brushed aside with charm and promises. I had kept faith, kept patience, and kept financial stability. Perhaps too much faith, too much patience. I picked up a khaki shirt and held it, letting the fabric fall through my fingers. I could almost see the years peeling off my shoulders, the weekend spent covering for Melvin's laziness, the overtime I endured to ensure the dealership thrived, the silent resentment that had been growing like ivy over the foundation of our family. Frances had shifted too, subtly, imperceptibly. The warmth of her childhood gaze had changed into calculation, into negotiation, into the delicate push-pull of an adult caught between loyalty to me and loyalty to the man she loved. And yet, yesterday had been different. The tickets, the generosity, the care. I replayed her small gesture, the precise pressure of her hand against mine. Her whispered words meant to thaw a decades-old frost. Dad, we want you to have this. Please, be happy. That moment had cracked something deep inside me, something I hadn't realized had hardened. I opened the dresser drawer and started folding shirts. 1, 2, 3. Each fold was deliberate, a ritual to calm the swirling storm of memories. I recalled my own sacrifices, the money I had spent on their anniversaries, the Lexus, the continuous support, the bonuses I had delayed spending to cover their whims. How had it come to this? I wondered if they had ever appreciated it, or if my generosity had simply become invisible. Expected. Melvin's failures, excuses, and audacity had slowly corroded the trust I once held so freely. And yet, the tickets were tangible proof that perhaps not everything had been lost. Perhaps Frances had retained some part of the little girl I had adored, the one who trusted easily, laughed freely, and loved unconditionally. But could I trust it? Could I trust her judgment now after years of observing the influence Melvin had over her? The way her eyes sometimes darted nervously toward him before answering me, the subtle hesitation in her voice. I paused in packing, leaning against the dresser, and let myself remember my own daughter at 7. Tiny hands clutching mine in the kitchen, her laughter echoing through the walls, the pride in her eyes when she learned a new skill or mastered a challenge. That girl had been fearless, joyful, open, and bright. Where had she gone? How had the layers of adulthood and Melvin's presence altered her so drastically? And more importantly, could she come back, at least partially, for this trip? The sun shifted, cutting longer shadows across the bedroom floor. The day had begun fully now, and yet I was rooted in past regrets, a history of sacrifices mingled with resentment. I had tried to be a father who gave without asking for acknowledgement, a man who could balance generosity and discipline, patience and authority. And yet, here I was, questioning everything, doubting everything, feeling the weight of decades of small betrayals, real or imagined. I turned to the window and looked out over the Phoenix streets, the world continuing in its relentless heat and brightness. Somewhere below, people were commuting, talking, living their lives without the burden of personal history I carried. I envied them. And yet, I also knew I couldn't step away. This trip, these tickets, were more than just a journey across continents. They were a test, a reckoning, a possibility of redemption for the fractured trust between us. I pulled out another shirt, carefully folding it, and thought about Melvin again. His laugh had seemed genuine yesterday. Too often it hadn't been. Too often it had been a performance, a mask to hide incompetence or manipulation. But yesterday's laughter, it had sounded effortless, almost real. I shook my head, refusing to let myself be too optimistic. Optimism had betrayed me before, yet I wanted to believe desperately. Perhaps that belief was the only way to reclaim what had been lost. I moved to the living room, carrying a stack of folded clothes toward the suitcase. Photographs lined the shelves. Frances at 7, 9, 12, her smile wide, her face bright. I traced the frame of her 7th birthday picture, the one where she was missing front teeth. Laughing at something I had said, the memory hurt and comforted in equal measure. That little girl had been fearless in her love for me. Could the adult woman I now saw still carry that same core? Could the generosity of these tickets, tangible proof of thought and care, be evidence that she could? The suitcase beckoned. I placed the folded shirts inside, tucking them carefully, almost ceremoniously, as if this act could somehow preserve the past while opening the door to the future. I added pants, socks, a lightweight jacket, imagining the temperatures I would face. the wildlife I would see, the mornings spent waiting for the sun to rise over the savannah. And yet, I paused. Doubt lingered, whispering like a shadow. How much of this is real? How much is manipulated? How much is Melvin's influence disguised as generosity? I had to confront that doubt, or it would taint every memory, every moment of this trip. I had to allow myself to hope while maintaining vigilance. It was a delicate balance, one I had never fully mastered. I sat back on the bed, the suitcase half packed, and let my mind drift. Lions, elephants, rivers teeming with life. Kilimanjaro, white and majestic, towering above the plains. And Frances, the daughter I had once known. The one who had wrapped herself around my hand as a child, smiling without calculation, laughing without restraint. Perhaps buried beneath years of Melvin's influence, she still existed. Perhaps this trip would allow her to emerge again. For the first time in a long time, the thought of family brought both fear and excitement, both mistrust and hope, both resentment and possibility. The suitcase, the tickets, the anticipation, they were more than just preparation for travel. They were preparation for reconciliation, for rediscovery, for testing whether the little girl I remembered was still alive in the adult woman I now embraced as my daughter. And so I packed. Each item a small act of faith, each fold a quiet acknowledgement of the past and a tentative step toward the future. Each thought a battle between doubt and hope. Africa waited, and with it, perhaps the possibility of a family restored, of trust rebuilt, of memories reclaimed. Tomorrow I would continue packing. Tomorrow I would organize supplies, binoculars, cameras, journals. Tomorrow I would allow myself to anticipate. And perhaps in those preparations, I would also begin to reconcile with the years of resentment I had carried. Slowly, piece by piece. Because the tickets were real. The safari was real. And for the first time in years, the possibility that my daughter still loved me unconditionally, and that perhaps Melvin was not entirely lost to self-interest, was real too. The morning sun broke through the blinds again, painting the bedroom in harsh streaks of white. And the tickets lay on the nightstand like a promise I wasn't sure I deserved. Tanzania, Kilimanjaro, savannas alive with predators and giants alike. 2 weeks in a place that had been a dream for decades, and yet as real as the heat pressing against the walls of my Phoenix home. I sat on the edge of the bed, suitcase open at my feet, and let myself inhale deeply. The air smelled faintly of dust and sun-baked walls, the remnants of an Arizona summer. I ran my fingers along the crisp khaki shirts, folding them again and again, as if repetition could make the reality sink deeper into my bones. My heart beat a little faster with each fold, anticipation mixing with unease. Because I didn't just have to pack for a trip, I had to pack for trust, for hope, for the possibility that the daughter I once knew, the little girl who had laughed without calculation, was still alive under the weight of adulthood and Melvin's influence. The first decision was practical. Clothing, lightweight pants, breathable shirts, sturdy boots for walking across terrain that could swallow you whole, socks in neat bundles, a hat for the merciless African sun, binoculars, camera, journal for notes and sketches, small comforts that would remind me I was still myself, still grounded, still capable of observation. And yet, as I packed, the memories came in waves, unbidden and relentless. Frances at 7, climbing into my lap to show me a drawing of a lion she had made. The pride in her eyes, the way her small fingers had traced the mane, the joy radiating from her entire being. I'd encouraged her fascination, bought books about wildlife, promised to take her to Africa someday. That someday had slipped into decades, swallowed by bills, responsibilities, Melvin's schemes, and my own exhaustion. Melvin, I thought of him in the way he had infiltrated our lives, slowly, subtly, until he had become part of the landscape like the furniture he didn't care to maintain. The early days of his employment at the dealership, his missed targets, his endless excuses, all had tested my patience. I had funded their temporary needs, always telling myself it was for Frances, always believing in her judgment. Yet somewhere along the way, doubt had crept in, insidious and persistent. Could I trust her choices? Could I trust him? And now these tickets, a gift of unimaginable expense with no strings attached. Could generosity truly exist where I expected manipulation? I shook my head and turned back to the suitcase, carefully tucking in shirts and pants. Each fold was an act of faith. Each shirt placed inside was a reminder that I had earned this moment, that I had survived the years of tension, disappointment, and quiet resentment. I placed my hiking boots neatly at the bottom, their scuffed leather a testament to countless trips, adventures, and memories that had always been postponed. Next came the practical supplies: insect repellent, sunscreen, first aid kit, water purification tablets, small flashlight, batteries. Each item meticulously arranged as if preparation alone could shield me from the unexpected. I paused, staring at the first aid kit. The thought of accidents flitted briefly through my mind. Melvin's voice from that phone call, the one I had overheard, still lingered, faint but impossible to ignore. A crocodile or a buffalo, it's an accident. No one will suspect anything. I swallowed hard, reminding myself that my paranoia was my own creation. Melvin had never actually harmed me, not physically, not intentionally, and yet old habits die hard. The human mind clings to threats even when logic dictates otherwise. I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus on the excitement, on the adventure. The ticket in my hand, Kilimanjaro looming in my imagination, demanded it. Lunch passed unnoticed. I made a sandwich mechanically, sipping weak coffee while staring at the open suitcase. My reflection in the kitchen window startled me. Hair slightly graying at the temples, skin lined with years of labor and worry, eyes tired but alive with a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. I barely recognized myself. The man who had spent decades giving, sacrificing, enduring, he was about to leave for Africa, to see lions, elephants, and rivers teeming with life. And yet he was still haunted by years of family tension, still carrying the weight of resentment. The packing continued, deliberate and methodical. I carefully folded underwear, rolled socks, placed lightweight jackets at the top for easy access. I selected a notebook for sketches, a leather-bound journal I had bought for myself years ago but never used. It would serve as a record of this journey, a way to process everything I was feeling: the thrill of anticipation, the remnants of doubt, the fragile hope of reconciliation. By mid-afternoon, the bedroom floor was cleared, the suitcase nearly full. I paused, hand on the zipper, and considered the significance of the trip. This wasn't just a safari. This wasn't just a vacation. This was a chance to reclaim something lost: trust in my daughter, hope in my family, a sense of self unburdened by decades of compromise and caution. It was a chance to see Frances not through the lens of suspicion, but through the lens of the little girl she had been, and perhaps still was. I thought about the moments we had shared recently. Frances wrapping me in a hug, whispering for me to accept the gift, to allow myself happiness. The warmth of her presence, the careful pressure of her hand against mine, had done more to melt my defenses than anything Melvin had ever attempted with charm or manipulation. I realized slowly that trust wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about allowing the possibility of something better in the future. Evening approached, the sun dipping low and casting long shadows across the bedroom floor. I had laid out all the essentials for the trip: clothing, supplies, journals, camera, binoculars. The suitcase was ready, a physical manifestation of my readiness to step into this adventure. But the emotional packing, the preparation of my mind, my heart, my expectations, was far more complex. I thought of Frances again, of her eyes that held the faint glimmer of the little girl I remembered. I thought of Melvin, whose influence over her had been steady, subtle, sometimes maddening. I reminded myself that generosity could exist, even where suspicion had dominated. The tickets, tangible and undeniable, were proof of that, proof that even the smallest gestures could bridge decades of tension. I reviewed the itinerary once more: arrival in Tanzania, transport to the first lodge, early morning game drives, Nights under the stars, rivers and plains teeming with life. Each entry in the schedule was a promise of wonder, of experiences that could not be replicated in Phoenix, in the office, or at home. This trip would be an immersion in the natural world, a reminder of how vast and unpredictable life could be, and perhaps a reflection of how fragile trust could be as well. Night fell and I remained in the bedroom, suitcase closed, tickets on top, journal open. I wrote, in careful script, the anticipation I felt, the fears that lingered, the memories that haunted me, and the hope that this journey could heal some of the fractures in our family. Writing, I realized, was as much preparation as folding shirts or packing boots. It was organizing the internal chaos, confronting doubt while embracing possibility. By the time I turned off the lamp and climbed into bed, the excitement had softened into a quiet, steady pulse. I closed my eyes and imagined the first morning in Tanzania, the sun rising over the savannah, elephants moving in slow procession, lions surveying their territory from the distance, the snow-capped Kilimanjaro standing sentinel above it all, and beneath it, the hope that my daughter, the woman she had become, shaped by love and life, and yes, by Melvin, was still there, waiting for this journey as much as I was. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to sleep with anticipation rather than suspicion. Tomorrow, I would finalize the last preparations. Tomorrow, I would check the camera, organize the guide's notes, pack snacks for the road, ensure nothing was left behind. But most importantly, tomorrow, I would begin to fully allow myself to embrace this journey, not just through Africa, but through the fragile terrain of family, trust, and redemption. Because this safari was more than lions and elephants. It was a journey into the heart of everything I had given, lost, and hoped to reclaim. The alarm rang before dawn, a sharp reminder that today was no longer a plan, a dream, or a possibility. It was real. Tanzania waited. I lay in bed, for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of the Phoenix air conditioning and the distant sounds of the waking city. The tickets were still on the nightstand, edges slightly worn from repeated handling, the words Kilimanjaro in Tanzania embossed in bold, undeniable proof that this was happening. I dressed quickly, khakis, lightweight shirt, boots polished and ready, and ran a comb through my thinning hair. Each movement felt ritualistic, almost sacred. The anticipation and anxiety coiled together inside me, a nervous energy that made every step toward the door both exciting and terrifying. This wasn't just a trip. It was a test, a reckoning, and a chance at something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Hope. Francis and Melvin waited at the airport, surprisingly punctual. Francis's eyes sparkled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness, a reflection of the girl I remembered. Bright, uncalculated, full of life. Melvin, on the other hand, carried his usual calm, almost smug demeanor, but there was something different in the way he looked at me today. No tricks, no schemes, or at least none I could see. Perhaps he had finally learned that some gestures required no ulterior motive. The flight itself was uneventful but luxurious, a stark contrast to the years of tension and compromise that had preceded this moment. Business class stretched before me like a promise of comfort and indulgence. The seats wide, the blankets soft, and the food carefully curated for travelers like me who hadn't flown often. I let myself relax, just a little, savoring the fact that I had earned this experience, that someone had recognized my decades of hard work and sacrifice. As the plane descended toward Kilimanjaro International Airport, the view out the window stole my breath. The vast plains stretched endlessly, dotted with green clusters of acacia trees, rivers snaking like silver threads across the landscape. The snow-capped peak of Kilimanjaro rose majestically above it all, a sentinel over the wilderness. I pressed my forehead to the glass, feeling both awe and a strange, aching nostalgia. This was the Africa I had imagined, the Africa I had dreamed of for decades, and now it was mine to explore. The first lodge welcomed us with the scent of fresh wood, crisp linens, and a faint undertone of the wild beyond the walls. Guides greeted us, warm smiles and careful politeness masking the sharp awareness that came with years of leading travelers through dangerous terrain. The rooms were spacious, elegantly furnished, each detail thoughtfully arranged. For the first time in decades, I felt as if the world was unfolding exactly as it should, beautiful, untamed, and full of possibilities. But as I unpacked, memories crept in. Frances at 7, laughing with abandon, the little girl who had trusted easily and loved freely. Melvin moving into our house, slowly becoming a fixture I had resented. The countless arguments, the missed sales targets, the Lexus, the bills, the constant need to monitor, control, and correct. All of it had led to this moment, where the past collided with the present in a dizzying swirl of emotion. Could I let go of that resentment, even for 2 weeks, and simply be? The first safari drive began before sunrise, the air crisp and fragrant with the scent of earth and vegetation. I climbed into the open-top vehicle, Francis and Melvin seated beside me, and the guide explained the rules. Silence, observation, patience. The vehicle rolled forward, tires crunching over gravel, and suddenly the plains opened before us. A herd of elephants emerged from the mist, moving with slow, deliberate grace. I held my breath watching the massive creatures traverse the golden grass. Their trunks swayed rhythmically, ears flaring with occasional gestures of curiosity. I wanted to speak, to exclaim, to share this worry with Francis, to feel a connection beyond words. But I stayed silent, letting the moment settle into my bones. And then, a lion. Just one, surveying the plain from a slight rise, its golden eyes meeting mine as if it recognized some shared understanding. The thrill of it, the raw, untamed majesty, sent a shiver down my spine. Years of dreaming, of postponement, of sacrifice, coalesced in this single, fleeting instance. The world outside this safari, with its arguments, debts, and disappointments, seemed to dissolve. Frances leaned over, whispering in my ear, "Dad, look at him. Isn't he incredible?" Her hand brushed mine, and the familiar warmth, the old remembered pressure, reminded me of her childhood. She had returned, not entirely perhaps, but enough to stir hope in my heart. Melvin spoke then, his tone quieter than usual. "You've earned this, Ben. Enjoy it. No strings, no hidden plans." I wanted to believe him, and for the first time, I could. There was something in his manner, in the way he avoided smirks or sly comments, that felt genuine. The safari continued, each moment more breathtaking than the last. Herds of zebra, impalas bounding across the plains, giraffes dipping their long necks to the acacia trees, birds wheeling overhead in perfect choreography. Every sight, every sound, every movement of wildlife pulled me deeper into a world I had only imagined. The guide, patient and attentive, offered insights about behavior, tracks, and habitats, but I barely noticed the details. My mind was too occupied with the wonder of being alive, the privilege of witnessing these creatures in their natural habitat. By the second day, a sense of calm settled over me. The early tension, the cautious mistrust, had softened into something more fluid. Trust, perhaps, or at least acceptance. I realized that the trip wasn't just about observing Africa. It was about observing life, the way it moved, the way it survived, the way it endured challenges beyond my comprehension. And maybe, in a small way, that observation extended to my family. Frances laughed more freely now, teasing Melvin lightly, sharing stories from her childhood. The warmth between us grew, subtle but unmistakable. I realized that the little girl I had adored, the one who had trusted easily and loved without hesitation, was emerging again, tempered by adulthood, but unmistakably present. Melvin's influence hadn't erased her. It had shaped her, yes, but not entirely. And that was enough. The final morning of the safari, we stood together overlooking a river at dawn. Crocodiles lay motionless along the banks, and a distant herd of buffalo moved like shadows across the plain. Kilimanjaro towered above us, magnificent and serene. I felt a strange mixture of humility and exhilaration, the kind of awe that reminded you of your own smallness in the world, and yet of your capacity to grow, forgive, and embrace life fully. I glanced at Frances. She was smiling, a hint of that childhood light in her eyes. And for the first time in years, I felt certain that she had chosen to come back to me, to the family we had once been, if only in part. I glanced at Melvin. There was no smirk, no hidden agenda, just a man who had, against my expectations, facilitated a gift that had changed everything. I reached out, placing my hand over Francis's shoulder. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice carrying more than gratitude. It carried hope, forgiveness, and the fragile beginnings of trust renewed. She leaned into me, and I realized that while the journey to Africa had been physical, the real journey had been emotional. We had traversed distance, danger, and doubt, and now, standing together in the heart of the wild, we had crossed into reconciliation. That evening, as the sun set over the savannah in a blaze of orange and gold, I understood that this trip had given me more than sightings of lions or elephants. It had given me perspective, a renewed connection to my daughter, a tentative trust in the man I had once doubted, and a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in decades. Africa had not only awakened my senses, it had awakened my heart, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt whole.